Anybody have a suggestion about who might be the temporary chair?
Nominate John
I
Banks.
nominate John Banks.
John Banks has experience.
Yeah. Okay with you, John?
I nominate John Banks too. Hello, everyone.
Oh, John, okay with you?
Sorry, I had to step away. I've been Zooming all morning
Oh,
and have to take a bathroom break once in a while.
well, bad news. They just made you the temporary chair until Paul Downing can join the meeting.
Oh, I thought Kevin was our co-chair.
One of
you got it,
one of you
John.
needs-
All right, yeah, whatever works. Thank you. I don't even
All right.
have the agenda in front of me. So I'm going to ask Paul Tebow to get us started here and move ahead.
Okay, well, as normal, I think the first thing to do for folks who are on the stream is to do introductions. I don't know if everybody's screen looks like mine, but my upper left screen is Sarah. You're muted, Sarah.
Sorry. Good morning. I'm Sarah Medina, state appointed representative.
Okay, and John Cashwell? I don't know if John could hear me. Bob Checkaway, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Bob Checkaway. I'm a state representative from Freeport.
And John Caswell, state representative from Bangor. Sorry, I was muted.
Okay. Kevin?
Hello, everyone. Kevin Hancock, State Commissioner from Casco.
James?
Morning, everybody. James Cody, State Commissioner from Farmington.
And John Banks, back to you.
John Banks, Penobscot Nation Commissioner.
Matt?
Good morning, Matt Dana, Passamaquoddy Commissioner from Indian Township.
Zeke?
Hey, good morning, guys. Z. Croft McDonald, Holistic Way Representative from Holton Band.
Okay. Sandy?
Good morning, everybody. Sandra Yarmel, Passamaquoddy Zebaiag representative.
And Bert?
Morning, everybody. I'm Bert Polchis, one of the Penobscot commissioners appointed by the Penobscot Nation.
Thanks, Bert. And in the Zoom right now, we also have Judd and Tony who are working on the sustenance study. So Judd?
Yes, I'm Judd S.D. Kendall. I'm a researcher for MITSC on the sustenance study.
And Tony?
I'm an applied social scientist. I work with the Maine Shellfish Learning Network as well as the University of Maine, and my specialties have been in doing engaged work with Wabanaki communities as well as studying food systems, and a lot of that work has been with fisheries.
Thanks, Tony. Okay, we may have a couple more joining us, but John Banks, I suggest that we go ahead and look over the agenda. I know you don't have it in front of you, but I can put it up on the screen.
I assume we have some minutes from the last meeting that we need to process.
Yeah, well, first we need to just take a look at the agenda. So I'm putting that up. Can you folks see it now?
Yep.
So, John, on the agenda, a couple of things that I had talked to Paul Downing about. One is that the intention was to have a hopefully short executive session which was going to happen the last meeting, but we didn't get to. Question there is whether to have it at the end, which does mean we wouldn't have to interrupt the public stream. But if we do that, Paul was suggesting that we set a hard stop time to move to the executive session to make sure that that gets done today. So Paul had suggested maybe the hard stop at 12:45 or earlier if you guys think you need to make it earlier to make sure that gets done.
Yeah, that sounds good to me, Paul. I like the idea of having the executive session at the end of the meeting so that we don't interrupt those members of the public that may be joining us today.
So is there a consensus then that at 1:45 the commission will move to the executive session? Okay. Sounds like.
This is Bert. I'm all for that.
The other agenda issue is that you may recall I sent out something about the repatriation issue at the Harvard Peabody Museum, and Matt and Bob have both asked that that be placed on the agenda to discuss whether MITSC would, do something in response to that request for support on the repatriation. So is there a consensus to add that as a new business? If not,
Yep.
guess
This is Bert. Yep.
all right, then the next item, I'm going to take down the agenda if we don't need it up there right now. The next on the agenda, as John was anticipating, is the review and approval of the minutes from the March 3 meeting that was sent out to all of you last week. If you've had a chance to review it or not, I can put it up on the screen if folks want me to do that, but it was sent out to everyone ahead of time.
Paul, if I'm not rushing things, shall we, I would move to adopt the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor,
Excuse
say
me, who was-
aye.
I'm sorry,
Aye.
Minutes are approved.
who was the second?
I was.
John.
John Cashwell.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda, as usual, is the managing director report that includes the financial report. Sent out the 3 March financial reports. Nothing really remarkable or different in them, except you may have noted that in March, our spending did tick back up. It's now a little closer to sort of pre-COVID levels and for the month of March, and that's largely because of increased activity on the by the contractors on the sustenance report, and also some additional time that Pat Maller had to spend on audit and other financial issues. We currently have 145,000 and some $145,334 in the 2 accounts as of today. We're basically on track to finish the fiscal year about where I thought a carryover somewhere in the $90,000 range. The audit, I've sent you various communications about the audit, but the audit is now a done deal. It's another clean audit. You have the electronic version of it. We got a limited number of paper copies. I was going to give one of those to Paul Downing. Pat has one, and going to keep one in the office. So I would hopefully you can rely on the electronic versions. But if anybody really wants a printed copy, we can make copies and send them out. And so that would be all I have on financial. Then on managing director report, it's a very brief, I sent you a very brief managing director report. And I don't really have anything to add to what was in there. But I would, respond to any questions about financial or the director report that any of you may have.
Does anybody have any questions? Paul, are you looking for any kind of a motion or action on the budget stuff at this point?
No, we don't normally do a vote. Well, sometimes we do. I mean, if someone wants to move to accept the financial report, sometimes we do that.
Well, that might be good just for the records to
Moved.
have that. So we got a motion from John Caswell to accept the financial report. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Bert Polchis. All those in favor? Say aye. Aye.
Aye.
It's approved. Thank you.
Well, then next.
Are there any other questions for Paul on the managing report, management report, or the manager's report? I should say. All righty, let's move right along, Paul. What do we got next?
Well, next is, going to old business, and the first item, I should note, we moved the executive session, we agreed to move to the end at 1:45. The first item under old business is to resume that discussion that began at the last meeting regarding, tribal state legislative proposals. I sent out a summary. It was in the minutes. Also, I sent yesterday another document relating to that. As you may recall, at the end of that discussion, Paul Downing had sort of summarized the discussion and suggested that it sounded like the commission wanted to do what he characterized as a broad stroke review of the settlement, and rather than, as various folks have said, rather than getting into the weeds on specific legislative proposals. So where that conversation was when we ran out of time basically was to really talk about what that broad stroke review might look like and how the commission would want to go about that. And so in order to try to further that, I sent you that rough transcript of the presentation I had made to the task force back in, I think it was September of 19. And then I sent out that document yesterday suggesting possible questions and issues that could be part of a framework to do a broad stroke review of the settlement. So that's where that's at, and we don't, I guess at this point, I'm looking for you all to just kind of pick up, that conversation and to talk, any reactions to what I sent around, and to see where the commission wants to go in terms of trying to create this review of the settlement. So.
Can I clarify something a minute, Paul?
Yeah.
You keep saying 1:45. We're not going to be here till 1:45, are we?
Oh, I'm sorry, 12:45. Yes, you're right, John.
12:45 or sooner.
12:45, yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I guess I'd like to hear more from Paul on what his thinking was, Paul Downing, on this broad stroke review of the Settlement Act.
Yeah, well,
I mean, MITSC has been involved with several broad stroke reviews of the settlement since 1980. And then, a lot of our early work was kind of picked up or transferred, if you will, over to the task force when the state legislative leadership passed a resolution last session to perhaps introduce legislation that would bring the main tribes into parity with the other 570 federally recognized tribes. So I don't know what Paul's thinking was here. But I do have a question for you, Paul, about all of the various bills that are in the legislature now in that list. You sent a list out, I guess, to the commission. Are we being asked by anybody, either any of the tribes or the state or any of the committee co-chairs to weigh in or provide a perspective of the commission on any of these bills at this point?
At this point, no. We were asked over the course of the session, there have been a couple of requests addressed to MITSC to comment on specific bills. I guess the most recent one was that LD 1060 gaming bill. And I think there was a request from its perspective on LD 159, the land into trust extension bill. We've on Representative Newell's had several bills in, and she has sought, a reaction on some of those, and has spoken to the commission about those. But
I guess what I'm asking, is there anything pending right now that the commission should be discussing in terms of weighing in on any?
Actually, right at the moment, I'd say no. Most of those bills have already gone through public hearing. In fact, a lot of them have already gone through work session. But there haven't been any recent, I just heard from Rena Newell this morning, there haven't really been any recent developments on any of those tribal state bills. And of course, there is still no big bill, no omnibus bill. The only thing that's coming up that I know of on any of those bills that were on the list, the bill relating to, collaboration on child support is set for a work session next week. But I mean, up to this point, MITSC hasn't, really, addressed that or, had any involvement with that.
John?
Yes, John.
Yeah, James is down there. There's I think a 28-day hiatus where the legislature has been basically sent home. James, can you update us on what's going on there?
Certainly. So after the legislature convened last week to pass a biennial budget, they adjourned sine die, or sine die, which means they're permanently adjourned until the legislature either calls themselves back or the governor calls them back. They have decided that they will reconvene on April 28th in person in Augusta. But in the meantime, the presiding officers are allowing work sessions and public hearings to continue. So that the legislature is technically not in session, but the committees are doing some work in the interim.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, James, for that clarification. I didn't know that April 28th had actually been set as the date. I didn't realize it was that far ahead. I appreciate any insight, James, you could give us in terms of realistically what that is likely to mean in terms of the impact on the legislature's consideration of various bills. Normally, I think the first session would end in June. Do you know whether or not that, does it have to end in June? I don't even know. So.
Sure. Well, it's a good question because I'm spending about 60 or 70 hours a week trying to figure that out myself these days. What I would say is that I think we can anticipate that committees will do a significant amount of work for the rest of April and May. And then I think we'll probably see some session days occurring periodically between now and the end of June. My expectation, based on all of the conversations I've had with leadership and committee chairs, is that we are in a situation where probably a lot of legislation is going to get carried over until January of 22. Nobody is saying that explicitly right now, but logistically speaking, to try to work the sheer number of bills that the legislature has in their possession between now and the end of June, it just isn't possible in a virtual environment. The legislature, because when they come back in April, will technically be in a special session. They could hold any number of special session days from now until the end of December. I think it's everyone's expectation right now that as long as there is some agreement on the supplemental budget, which will primarily deal with the $1.5 billion from the feds, as long as there's some agreement and collaboration between Democrats and Republicans on that, my presumption is that the legislature will conclude most of their work before the end of June. But that is a best guess at this point.
At this point, I think the Senate's gonna meet in the House chamber, and the House is gonna meet in the Civic Center. And that creates all kinds of logistical issues related to following legislature and participating, if you will.
So I wish I could bring, more information to the discussion, but I honestly don't have a lot. If there's anybody on the commission, particularly on the tribal side, maybe who's, has had any recent information about the status of the, the so-called omnibus bill and whether we're still going to see one. I mean, because I honestly don't know at this point. Do any of the tribal commissioners have?
Yeah, I have no knowledge of that. I know we're waiting for that LD. And I don't know the status of it at this point. Perhaps
I don't believe the
I'm
state-
looking at Matt Dana.
Yeah, I don't know anything either. I haven't heard.
Neither have I from the state side. Anybody else?
James, have you heard anything specifically on that?
On the printing of the omnibus bill,
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything. In fact, I'm just trying to look up how many bills have been printed here so far, because that'll give us a good gauge on when we might expect something. Let's see. So there's been, as of yesterday, about 1,400 bills that have been printed so far. So that means they probably have somewhere between 800 and 1,000 bills left to print, would be my guess.
Wow. Well, I'm no expert on legislative process, but I guess my feeling is it's, and I guess to follow up on what James said about what's likely to happen going forward is, I guess it's hard for me to imagine that, a bill of that magnitude regarding tribal-state relations is still going to really be addressed in this session. But if anybody else has different, thoughts on that, please share them.
I just emailed somebody that might have the answer to that. If I hear back before the meeting's over, I'll report to you guys.
Okay.
This has nothing to do with the content of the bill or anything else. But if I was the lobbyist for the commission right now, I would encourage everybody to operate on the presumption that it will likely be taken up in 22 and debated in 22 rather than resolved in 21. And that is not a criticism of anything, that's just purely logistical.
Yeah, thanks for that, James. And I guess, John Banks, to return to your question a little more completely, I mean, there are several bills, that have been reported out of committee, but, because of the budget thing, they haven't gone to the floor. 3 of those are, various appointments are, creating permanent positions, Wabanaki positions on the, in IFNW Advisory Council and the Marine Resources Advisory Council, and also the University of Maine System Board of Trustees. And all of those were, had favorable votes out of committee. I don't think they were all unanimous, but so I presumably at some point all of those are going to be addressed by the full legislature. And when I get more information about those, I'll let you know.
I doubt if you see any back pressure on any of those. It's just a logical, fair thing to do and without controversy.
Yeah, well, I guess I share that view, John, but I also, it was my understanding there were some dissenting votes, at least on the the UMaine trustees bill. I think there were some dissenting votes. And I'm not sure what that was about, but that's what I guess if there's anything else, John, on that, I'll try to provide it. But otherwise, I guess I'd like to.
No, I think we're all just kind of in a holding pattern. I appreciate the update, James, on the status of the legislature. That's very helpful. So yeah, let's move on unless anybody has anything else they'd like to say about the legislative stuff.
Can we go back to Paul's original question about a quote unquote broad stroke review of the settlement?
Sure. Yeah.
My memory, Paul and others, but correct me, from the last meeting is that Richard Rosen brought this up towards the end of the meeting and spoke quite eloquently about it. And there was a lot of interest in further exploring what he brought up. My memory of what he brought up was essentially this question: if we look at the world today in 2021, do we think that the tribes in Maine and the state of Maine are better off collectively under the 1980 Settlement Act than they would be today with what is the case in most of the rest of the country, federal Indian law being the primary intergovernmental framework? I thought, so I would just like to say, I thought that was a really powerful question. I think it's kind of the $64,000 elephant in the room question. And I personally would be really interested in seeing that question explored in a serious way, particularly if it was of interest to the tribes. Now, what I might then say, though, Paul, in terms of the possibility of a review, is this: what about, instead of primarily a historic look at this, more of simply a current look at it? In other words, if today federal Indian law was the primary intergovernmental framework, if today, not 10, 20, 40 years ago, but today, what would change for the tribes in Maine, and what would change for state government in Maine? How do we think it would be different? You know, I've had a sense, just from what I've listened to, primarily from our tribal commissioners, that there's a very strong feeling that the tribes today would be better off overall under federal Indian law than the Settlement Act. And my hunch is the same, but that certainly would require us getting educated about what would actually change. So just two points in closing there. One, I think this is a really important opportunity. And two, my interest would not so much be historic, but how the world would be different right now if federal Indian law was the primary intergovernmental framework.
All right.
Thanks, Kevin. Looking over some of these questions on here, I mean, some of them personally, it kind of seems a little redundant, and but looking it over, one of them, basically asks, whether the whether the state, tribes and the state benefited. Well, I can tell you this much, the tribes didn't really benefit, not from the Settlement Act itself, I don't believe. Now the state, yes, they did. They benefited the most. They didn't put, it didn't cost them anything. Where in this settlement, yeah, it cost us a lot. The other thing was, whether or not we would have, if we benefit from the Settlement Act. I don't think it was the Settlement Act itself that we have any of our benefits from. I think that because we do have people who are able to look at things and try to squeeze in what we can, without as much pushback from the state. And we know that pretty much anything that we try to do, we receive pushback. As far as the community, the relations between the communities, the local towns, the state. We've constantly tried to create positive relations, and in some cases, in certain areas, we're able to do that. But still, at the same time, the what the Settlement Act has allowed is that the wording, the state likes to change the words, the definitions of some of those words, and that leaves us at a standstill, or not necessarily at a standstill, but basically to where the tribes are unable to move forward in a way that we should be able to. So I think, yeah, we probably should go in here because we have a lot of people here that commissioners here who haven't been involved in some of the discussions that we've had in the past. I think we have reports that clearly show that the effects of the Settlement Act. And as far as how, whether we would be better off going, through federal jurisdiction, just like other tribes across this country, I believe that's our best bet. Now, can we develop? I think really with that, we would actually be able to develop even a better rapport with one another. with the state, with the local, because now we look at it as a state, it can't really sit there and stop us from moving forward where we see fit, because we're not going to move forward in areas that aren't going to help the state as a whole. So anyway, that's just my own little bit of input. I didn't read all the questions. I didn't, but I noticed that there were some questions on there that kind of overlap each other. So, but that's just my own personal view, not the view of the Penobscot Nation. So I want that to be clear.
Yeah, if I may, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I was going to say that I appreciate Paul making an attempt to get some of those questions on paper and give us something to think about and react to, because it's always easier to discuss something when you have some sort of basis. I also agree with Kevin that what matters most is where we are today and going forward. There's an awful lot of history that's written. And even though I'm a new commissioner and have not had the benefit of all the prior discussions, what really matters to me is where we are now and how we move forward. So I would like to know, for example, what the difference is and what federal jurisdiction would mean and what would benefit the tribes from that being under state jurisdiction does not allow. So I'd like to see that comparison, and then from there figure out, do we need to is federal jurisdiction the best option, or can there be some changes made within the state that might do the same thing? I'm not saying that there are, but I think what we need to do is figure out what the goal is and then how to get there, whether it's changes in state federal jurisdiction, changes in state law, whatever it might be.
Yeah, Kevin.
To Sarah's good point there about what the goal is, I think that is the key, because we all can relate to this, the last thing Maine needs is another position paper on Indian state relations. I'm thinking about something quite specific here, to Sarah's question about the goal, and that is MITSC taking up this question on its own initiative to contemplate whether we might take a position that suggests essentially that the Settlement Act be nullified and that the tribes return to a modern traditional relationship with the federal government, and that in that recommendation, if we got there, the point would be we felt that the tribes and the state would likely both benefit. Now, my point right now is not that anyone could say that would be our conclusion, because we have to look at quite a bit of stuff and talk about quite a bit of stuff. But to a potential goal, what about having Paul organize an internal position paper on what it would look like today if federal law ruled, as opposed to the Settlement Act, and we looked at whether or not we felt that's something we should recommend the state and the tribes consider.
John Banks could.
Yeah, wow,
Um,
a lot of discussion. When I think broadly about Kevin's idea to consider if the tribes are better off today than they were and what it would look like. It's a very complicated analysis and question. And it depends on who you ask if we're better off or not. Personally, I'm better off because I got a career out of it. I'm just one tribal member. And, you know, with having a portion of our land base returned, that's provided a lot of benefits to the tribes. That doesn't mean that that there aren't fixes that are needed. There are fixes that are needed in the Maine Implementing Act in order for the tribes to be able to excel and accomplish our self-determination goals. There are regulatory and jurisdictional roadblocks in the Maine Implementing Act that are preventing the tribes from being able to move ahead in a self-determined way. That's our goal. You know, in some ways, I can summarize the whole thing. In some ways, it's very simple, and in other ways, it can get very complicated and get down into the weeds very quickly. In my mind, what needs to happen is that the state of Maine and all of its entities and agencies and legislative, you know, the legislature and all branches just need to understand and accept and recognize the Wabanaki tribe's inherent sovereignty. That's what needs to happen. And in so doing, that would necessitate some changes in the Maine Implementing Act. I think we all need to understand that 40 years later, the tribes are much different than we were in 1980, much different. And it's not a result of the Settlement Act, it's a result of federal recognition in the 70s. Once we became federally recognized, we became eligible for funding from many federal agencies to develop programs and visions at the tribes, all of the social services, health services, natural resources departments, everything, you know, tribal courts, tribal police, everything came about as a result of federal recognition in the 70s, not a result of the Settlement Act. So, you know, folks that are interested in, you know, carrying out cultural and traditional practices having to do with harvesting trees, animals, and plants, I think have benefited from the Settlement Act. We could benefit more if we didn't have the shackles of the state regulatory mechanism holding us back.
Well,
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
just one quick thought there, John. Thanks for sharing that. One possible way to frame this in the context you just described is if the tribes of Maine had a more normal relationship with the federal government, if that had primacy, would your objectives of sovereignty be advanced overall? My guess is they would be overall.
Oh yeah, I work with the federal government daily. They recognize our sovereignty. They recognize our inherent sovereignty. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. No, the very premise of having a direct relationship with the federal government makes a very strong statement about sovereignty. And inadvertently today, with that being trumped by the Settlement Act and preventing that relationship in its full form, I think that does limit tribal sovereignty, or at very least that's the question that should be explored. Anyway.
Oh, thank you for that, Kevin. Go ahead, Bert.
Yes, thank you. The the question here, I mean, one of the questions on this list is what impact did the addition of section 1735B to MITSC have on the deal that had earlier been made in the implementing act? I kind of look at the insertion, and when I speak to anyone about it, 1735B, I refer to that as how that's a backdoor that, or that was put in through the back door, at the last minute, which I look at that and see that as one of the major problems that we have when we're dealing with this, and to limit us in being able to utilize the federal legislation pass, things that might help us when the federal government passes bills that would help the tribe, federally recognized tribes in the United States. Basically, they do that overall, and yes, most of pretty much all of those will help us in our efforts to self-determination, being able to assert our sovereignty in decisions made. But it also, what I see is that it allows us, to really assess what's going on, the relationships that we have with the states and the communities around us in a better way, without feeling like, well, they're going to sit there and try to push back everything, and then again, like we've seen in the past, the wording has been twisted and redefined to basically inhibit our abilities to self-determination, self-reliance, and and use of our sovereignty. So I think, yeah, there should be that discussion. I think that would be an awesome discussion. But I think that when we go into a retreat, that sounds like a good thing to deal with during the retreat, because then we're not so stuck on well, we still have a time frame to deal with, but that would be somewhere where we can have good discussion, lengthy discussion, not having to worry about what's on the next part of the agenda. Like here, we're stuck to 2 hours. Well, today, an hour and 45 minutes. So
Yeah, that's a good point. This does make for a much longer discussion. And I just wanted to update that I did hear back from our ambassador, Mullian Dana, and she said that she expects the omnibus bill to be printed by this Friday. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. On the surface, what Kevin's asking for sounds like a reasonable sort of thing, but once you start to do that and to examine the current condition and relationship of the tribes to state and federal relationships, what Kevin's asking in a way is to penetrate the internal operations of the tribes, to tell this committee, if you will, how things work, who they work with, what's the benefits inside related to the feds. And I would suspect, given a lot of thought to this, that violates certain customs between the state and the tribes, and would be a very difficult thing to do as a commission without political authority in either place. And I just want to lay that on, because that's what's being asked, and I'm sure that would cause a lot of consternation here somewhere.
Can you just say that again, John, please, in terms of what the concern might be with MITSC looking at this question of what it would look like if federal Indian law reigned? I'm just talking about MITSC looking at it.
Well, MITSC is state and tribal. And if you look at what I believe are the tenets of a lot of agreements, one basic fundamental pillar in it is non-transparency from the outside of the tribes into the tribe's operations and relationships. That's what I'm talking about. And if you want to clear that question up, if you probably could go on doing what you're asking, but I believe that there could be a problem.
I appreciate that. I just say it to your point, if MITSC's mission, which I agree, is state tribal relations, looking at the dominant document that directs those relations, if that's not in our mission, then I guess I wouldn't know what is. You know, not to, I don't want to. Again, I wish Richard was here, because Richard brought this up, and he was so eloquent, and it was a different group in the meeting, but it had like a ton of momentum and support at that meeting. But part its point that I took from it is you can go another 40 years with the existing framework, and MITSC can work on moving deck chairs around. Option number one, which I think is a bit of a fair assessment of what we do today, honestly. Or we could look at the actual agreement itself and whether or not today Maine and the tribes are likely advanced by it versus the default of federal Indian law. Again, without making judgment on how it worked in 1980, but it's 2021. And are the tribes in the state better off with this than with what the default would be? I personally doubt it. And to not take that question up, to me, is to ignore the whole ball game, which is the structure that was created here. And is it better than what's going on in the rest of the country?
Go ahead, Bert. Thank you, Kevin, for those thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I understand where you're going, John. I'm John C. But I don't think we'd have to really go in that, into getting into internal tribal affairs. But what we can do, because there's testimony, we have our tribal attorneys, we have our tribal leadership who have put forth their testimony in regard to, during this whole thing with the omnibus bill, all that kind of, the work that that committee had done. So we can, if we look at that, we can get a lot of that information, and not just that, but even in our own records, our own reports that we've made in the past, various things that had come up, and I think that we'd have pretty much what we would need to be able to seriously put out our view as a commission, without infringing on internal tribal matters.
Yeah, Paul.
Can I just follow up on what Bert said? I wanted to, yeah, I would underscore what Bert said. I mean, the task force, really went through all of this in a lot of detail. And then, of course, the discussions, last year on the big on LD 2094 have really explored a lot of this. And I didn't take what Richard or Paul were talking about as sort of, redoing that. I think, most of the information has been developed through these processes. And so, and I guess I would also comment that, and this is, I guess, my personal view, but I mean, MITSC has done over the years and either done reports or participated in processes that have revealed a number of the problems that exist with the Maine Implementing Act. But I'm not aware of MITSC ever really squarely addressing the question that we're really kicking around today, which is the basic question that was presented to the task force was whether to, restore federal Indian law as the default, structure in the state of Maine, instead of the settlement structure, particularly on the civil regulatory side. And so I think, to me, and again, this is my opinion, but I think what's underlying this is the question of, does MITSC have an independent role to play, that about that question? And yes, MITSC is comprised of representatives of the state and representatives from the tribes, but MITSC is an independent entity. And so, to me, and like I say, a real underlying question here is, does the commission, as it is presently constituted, see itself as an entity that should exercise an independent view about those basic, structural questions? My personal view is that it should. But I also understand, when various comments are made that there's a government to government process going on, does MITSC have a role in that? Well, my personal view is MITSC has an independent role. But I want to make that.
Paul, if I may, just reflecting on what Kevin just said a few minutes ago, whether or not MITSC has a role shouldn't even be a question. If you look at, our mission, excuse me, I have some distractions going on here, sorry. If we look at, as Kevin explained, our mission, is to improve tribal-state relations and to try to study and resolve conflicts or differences of interpretation in the state act and the federal act. This shouldn't even be a question. Of course, it's within MITSC's wheelhouse to look at this now. So the task force, kind of took over that responsibility when, like I said, when the legislative leadership put out the resolution. So that's what I see us, just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen there, because that's going to directly impact what we may or may not do going forward, I think. But in terms of MITSC's independently continuing to look at that, to me, it shouldn't even be a question of whether or not we should or not. We definitely should. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say, to me, this question is right at the top of the decision-making tree. I think everyone would agree that some change needs to happen to optimize state and tribal relations. So then the question becomes, okay, what's the best way to do that? And if you start at the top of that decision tree, the first fork in the road is to the left. You could work within the Settlement Act to make changes, or the fork in the road to the right would be you could let that act go and default to the national standard. There must be a reason that's the national standard for tribal communities in this country. That can't just be random. And I think it would be ostrich in the sand a little bit up here in Maine to say, well, um, who cares what the rest of the country's doing? And to me, this is the first question in improving relations is, do you want to go down the road of tinkering with the act, or do you want to move to what is the normal national standard? I can't see how that's not a fair question. And in my limited time with this group, I haven't heard anybody explore that question.
Go ahead, Bert.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kevin. And I agree with you, John. I think that, and Paul, I truly believe that we do actually have the responsibility, to put forth our review. We look at the things that are going on. We can look at the things that the task force was going through. We can look at all of our reports from the past, all our discussions from the past, and formulate a view from MITSC. And it's nothing more than that. Because if the tribes, and even the state decide that, okay, maybe we should think about doing away with the Settlement Act. At least we have already put our view out there. It doesn't mean that we're going to say, well, this got to do this. That's not our place. We look and assess the relationship between the tribes and the state. And, personally, I think that, if the Settlement Act was done away with as a whole, we can still, the tribes can still maintain or even enhance better the relationships between the tribes and the state, because there's a lot of things that the federal legislation allows that would benefit the state. And really, the way I've seen things happen when the tribes get anything, and the state is all for it, it's only because they get pressure from their own people, their communities, because it's going to it's something that's going to benefit their people, not necessarily because it's going to benefit us. That's what I've seen. That's what I feel. So I think that, yes, we should have that serious discussion and go through it and even give our view.
So I'm thinking, just looking at the time here in our agenda, we probably ought to think about moving ahead. This is a very big subject. It goes to really, in so many ways, to the heart of what MITSC is all about. So I'm in favor of setting aside a meeting. I don't know what you want to call it, strategic planning or a retreat or whatever, where we can just get together as a group and really have this discussion, without any time constraints. Because I understand that there's different levels of understanding here within the commission. And so, yeah, go ahead, John. You were gonna jump in there.
You just told us that the omnibus bill is gonna be printed Friday.
Right.
If there isn't any other reason than to postpone this a little bit, than to read what that is, well, before we write off in all directions. If it's printed and out, then somebody on behalf of the tribes and others has labored a lot at trying to figure out what the outcome should be. I think we ought to have that document before we start deciding how the world is going to look in next week.
Yeah, if indeed is out. She said she wasn't sure, but that's what she thinks is gonna happen now. Kevin?
But it's coming fast, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really on the fence on this one, John. I respect what you just said, but I'm also really in a mindset of actually setting something in motion or getting shot down. So at the last meeting, there was definite enthusiasm for taking this up. But we put it off. My understanding was the whole purpose of this meeting was to take this question up. And we could put the question off again. I don't know. You guide me here.
Well, I'm fine. I mean, I could, you know,
I'm really kind of inclined to throw out a motion, and that'll move it one way or the other right now.
yeah, well, all I'm saying is that I think that this particular subject does need some more discussion within the commission. And that we're
All right,
short
I'm
on
gonna
time. So,
defer to that.
just, you know, I hate to cut off the bait here. I mean, really, and if you want to make a motion, Kevin, I would certainly entertain that. You know, I agree with, and I admire your passion and your enthusiasm to actually do something here, rather than move
Well,
the deck
that's
chair
where I'm
around.
torn. I mean, I'm all happy to wait for another meeting. I'm just worried about how much time we're going to spend getting back to this exact point 2 months from now at another meeting.
No,
but
no, I would support moving ahead, you know, fairly quickly, as soon as we get a chance to take a look at the bill. If it does come out Friday and, you know, we get a chance to take a look at it, maybe we could get together for a half a day, at least for starters. And really, you know, because there's just so much here that, you know, I'm listening to all the comments and listening, you know, there's a lot of discussion about what is federal recognition or federal law, and it's very complicated. And we just need more time, really, to discuss it. James, go ahead.
This is a little tangential to the conversation, but hopefully it's helpful. I'm looking at the fact that in about a year from now, some of the state commissioners, whether it's all of us or a few of us, are going to be up for reappointment. Time flies. And so I'm just trying to think about this term on the commission and where we're going to end up at. And, you know, to Kevin's point, I think it would be nice to have some sort of action plan that, you know, I think all of us on the state side, and I know the tribal commissioners feel the same way, it'd be nice to sort of hang our hat on the fact that we achieved something during this term on the commission. To John Banks and John Cashwell's point, there is a piece of me that's inclined to think this through a little bit in terms of how it fits into a strategic plan for the next, you know, 12 to 14 months. And then we'll see what happens with appointments and reappointments and all that stuff. But I guess my only thought is, and I'll reserve, you know, based on where others want to go, but my only thought is we've got a short window here in this current term that many of us are in to try to do something. And I think my head is in a place where we should prioritize a few actionable items to get done that folks can agree on and that we find valuable, and move on those, in this crazy virtual environment. Let's prioritize those and move on those in the coming months. But that's a bit of a tangent. I just wanted to share that opinion.
Go ahead, Bert.
Well, I really think that we should have the discussion. We should put the time aside for it, and if it means making a motion, Kevin, I'll make the motion. Maybe you can word it for me, but I will make that motion because I do feel it's an important one to have, and we can talk. Once we make the motion, we vote on it, and we should be looking into it. Then that's what it is. Then we can have discussion at another time. So I'll make that motion.
Yeah, and to me, Bert, just back to you on that. Thank you, and John and James. To me, the motion is simply to take up the question as a priority question, not to develop an opinion today, but to agree that we're going to prioritize this question of what if federal Indian law was restored as the default intergovernmental framework in Maine. Would the tribes and the state likely benefit? That, to me, would be the motion to prioritize that question.
Thanks for wording my motion for me. So that's my motion.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Paul Tebow, did you capture the motion?
Yes, and we have a recording as well, so we're okay.
Could you read back the motion?
Well, the motion is for the commission to prioritize examining the question of whether or not the restoration of federal Indian law in Maine would be to the benefit of the tribes in the state.
Does that capture your motion, Bert, and your second, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay, motion on the floor in a second. Is there any more discussion? John?
It's a nice to do motion. When that omnibus bill comes out this week or next, that's going to be the stake in the ground as determined, I believe, by the tribes and others. And it'll probably add to the discussion, so let it rip.
Okay, Sarah, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was gonna say that I have no problem with the motion. It's a little bit general. I still am someone who likes to talk about specifics. So I think in this consideration, we ought to look at some of the specific things. I keep hearing the tribes will be better off under federal jurisdiction, but I'd like a comparison state, federal, and I guess we can talk about that. And I agree.
That state federal comparison, Sarah, was done by the task force, and that document exists. It's part of the legislation. It's part of the history. So that information is available.
Okay.
That's what I was just gonna say.
Yeah. Are we ready to vote? Does anybody have any other comments before we vote on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, say aye,
Aye.
or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Next item, Paul?
Was there any opposition?
No,
Okay.
unanimous.
Well, John, I would suggest, in light of the time, because we always seem to get into this bind, I recommend that you rearrange the agenda to move to the sustenance study. We've got Judd and Tony on here, and I think it's really important at this point that they get some feedback from the commission. So I'm asking you to rearrange to take that up at this point.
Yeah, is there any opposition to moving to that item now? Seeing none, let's go there.
Okay, so just as preamble, I sent around some materials that the researchers have drafted, and as I said, Judd and Tony are with us, and I guess I would leave it initially to Judd to make some comments about where they're at with it. And Tony is also available to talk with you about, in particular, about the focus groups that they're trying to do. So Judd?
Thanks, Paul, and thanks to everybody. It was great to be a fly on the wall for a fascinating discussion on the last agenda item. Hopefully this will be equally of interest. The researchers, myself, Tony, and Lexi Anderson, are doing a study authorized by MITSC based on its authority in the Implementing Act on the impact of non-Indian policies and activities on the quality and quantity of traditional fish stocks and tribal sustenance practices. Part of that study obviously is coming to grips with tribal sustenance practices. Much of the information about policies and quality and quantity of traditional fish stocks is available by usual research methods, but trying to understand tribal sustenance practices, past, present, and what could be in the future, we've determined requires or really is best served by having focus groups where Wabanaki people can talk about those issues. And what we've given you is the draft protocol for focus groups. There would be hopefully 3 focus groups, and a draft invitation to go to Wabanaki people, tribal members who could participate or would be interested in participating in those focus groups. So I'd welcome, of course, any questions about the study in general, but what we're interested in now is any comments or thoughts or suggestions about the protocol, and then in particular about who we might contact, anyone who has any people we might contact with our invitation. We would be pleased to have that. And we're glad to have the discussion now, or you can contact, I guess, through Paul or through our emails uh, if you have any suggestions on either of those 2 items.
Anybody?
I'm not sure if I got the information on it. I mean, I know we talked about that was going to be happening, but I don't know if I actually got anything regarding the focus groups or anything. Was that sent out to?
Yes, it was sent out.
Okay. But I know I think in the past I think I mentioned before, when we talked about such, and this was years ago, when Jamie was still chair, and we had long discussion on and also our meetings with people like, Pat Kelleher and a few others when it came to sustenance. Sustenance wasn't just, hand to mouth, because there was an argument about whether, what sustenance is versus commercial, say like the fishery, commercial fishing. Historically, I know from all of the stories that I've heard, from a lot of our elders, that, we didn't call it commerce. We didn't call it commercial. We didn't call it sustenance or subsistence or anything like that. It was just done. We had access, those of us that harvested from the ocean, we harvested, from there. And then we had our relative tribes that were inland, further inland, and didn't have access to the ocean. They had things that we didn't have access to. So we traded, bartered. So in a sense, that's considered a form of commerce, right? And yet that form of commerce was also a big part of our sustenance.
Bert, let me be clear on, we're not going to try to define the word, well, let me back up a step. The word sustenance is not defined in the main implementing act. It's in there, but it's not defined. And we're absolutely not trying to define it as a legal matter or anything like that. But we are looking at what tribal people think about sustenance practices in the past, in the present, and what they could be, and what the impact of state policies has been, state and other entities' policies has been on that. So I hear you volunteering to be a member of a focus group.
Okay.
Tony, send him an
Do
invitation.
you want me to, I can, if I have the power, I can share my screen and I can kind of like walk you through and walk you all through sort of how I would envision the process being and some of my logic behind it. I don't know if I,
That would be great.
Tony, I can put it, I just opened those up.
oh, you got it? Yeah, you can do that too.
Which one do you want up?
Do the protocol, the questions. I
Let's see,
mean,
which
the other
one?
one's just more of an invitation, you know, that can be distributed, and the rationale is, you know, I certainly know people that can inform this conversation, but you know, I don't know everybody, and there are people that you all know that will answer your request and not mine. So, you know, having support to distribute that will only give us a more robust amount of participants to draw from. So I just did the invitation again as something that could be distributed, and you know, having some support from you all would certainly be helpful just for response rates. Let's see this.
Are you seeing the document
Popping up.
now that you want? The document that I put up, is that?
Yeah, that's the protocol, Paul.
Okay. So you want to go ahead, Tony?
I don't see it yet, but I imagine it's bouncing up from space and will come down. Look at my copy and pretend that we're all on the same page. So at the very beginning, I mean, there's some things that people aren't going to see. I mean, really, this is going to be just for me who's facilitating it, but I thought I would share it because you can see the different areas that I'm looking at. And with any kind of discussion, you know, there's a part where you need to get people warmed up to thinking and talking about the subject. And I'm a really big fan of this link. Has David Francis out on the water, and they're talking about, you know, what they lived on along the shore, and you know, it's about sustenance, and the story that they're telling on the water. It goes through a lot of the different areas that the report is looking at. So it's just going to be a sort of more natural conversation way to talk about these different parts of the video, and the relationship to how they shape sustenance practices or the availability of species. Like for instance, they talk about the causeway going in, you know, by Zabayak, and what that did for the ecology and for the fisheries. And they talk about things like how much fish they used to catch and things like that. So to me, you know, having that video to start with, there's a lot of different reference points that I can use to bring up like things like access or policy changes, or you know, environmental change, or how they've seen species change over time. Again, all these different sections are just consistent with the historical report that we're building, but what it'll do is add more individualized context to how people are seeing this, you know, at their feet, literally. So um, yeah, and I think one thing that's useful for me is always getting feedback on different things. You know, if there's questions you would like to see added to the extent possible. You know, I'm confident with what we came up with, and as always, again, I want to have an open process where I welcome those different kind of, you know, contributions. It's only going to make our work stronger.
Tony, has that been sent out to the commission? What you just pulled up on the screen, has that been sent to the commission? Because I don't recall seeing it.
I can answer that. Yes, I sent it out last week.
Okay,
But
I'll dig for it. Thank you.
Yeah, I've seen it on the email that came with with the finance reports and all that.
Yeah.
So what's your time frame, Tony and Judd or Alexis? I guess I see Alexis is on here with us. She must be part of this study. So what is the time frame here, and when do you anticipate to be uh, conducting these focus groups?
Yeah, I think for the focus groups themselves, I think originally, I was thinking about getting them done now. And then, when I was seeing the timing of the meetings that you all had, I felt most comfortable again having feedback and comments from you all before advancing that. And then it's going to depend on the type of response rate that I'm getting, as well as what those participants have going on. And my logic behind that is if these people are directly involved in commercial fisheries, they like clamming season's coming up, and I don't expect somebody working two tides to want to come in and talk to me, but maybe I can get them towards the end of the summer. Not saying all of them would be done during then. I'd like to do one this month at a minimum, and then schedule a couple more, just depending on what we learn from the first one and what makes sense, like what do we not know, and when can we schedule another one that'll be more flexible to some other people's dates. I'd obviously like to get them done, let's see, April, May, June. I imagine getting 3 focus groups done by then is plenty of time. It just, for me, it's a matter of, I don't know who's going to be responding and what their schedules are like. So I'm trying to be sensitive to both people, whatever walks or whatever work requirements they have. Basically, I'm just trying to work around that, and seasonality of fisheries and stuff like that. So like, I know when the alewives are running, I'm not going to be able to get a hold of some people. And so I'm just going to try and get one done as soon as possible, and then again hold some subsequent ones. So hopefully that's a roundabout way of answering your question, John. But again, I'm just trying to be sensitive to the time of year and what may or may not be drawing people away that can contribute to the conversation.
Kind of like right now with the over season going.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
But I'll be able to
surprised.
get them pretty soon, because they may just be doing elvers and not something else. And it's a great point. So I might be able to get them when they're done, because they're not going to be out clamming or something like that. But then there's also people who are retired or other things that or just have great stories and connections to that. And that's in the invitation too. It's not just people who are involved directly or indirectly, but like I say, like the example I put, my grandmother did the fisheries, or not the fisheries, the clamming surveys for the state, and that's true. She did do that. People who have those kind of stories are also useful.
So just to kind of go back, and I'll let you speak, Bob, in just a second, but I just wanted to kind of have a little foundational discussion here. This was originally brought to the commission by Ed Bassett from Sabayak. He works with their fisheries committee down there. And I think what he was asking the commission to invoke was that provision in the Maine Implementing Act that um, allows for the commission, or promotes the commission, to look at state fisheries policies and how they might have an impact on tribal sustenance fishing activities. So I want to make sure that this project remembers and keeps that foundational initiative in this project. So I don't know if you can help clarify that that's really what this is about, or or what.
Well, John, that is what it's about, and there's work proceeding in the background people have, all three of the researchers have drafted some language on other sections of the report, and we're process of integrating some of the research and some of the drafting. But the focus groups, so the focus groups are part of the report and part of the study. They're not necessarily the central theme of the study, but understanding tribal sustenance practices is necessary to complete the study. Does that help?
Yeah, but I don't know if there's a more direct way to get at the question, the fundamental foundational question that Ed Bassett raised. Speaking for Penobscot, I know my fisheries biologist could sit down with you in a half an hour and tell you all of the issues with state fisheries policies that are problematic uh, with trying to promote and expand and establish tribal sustenance fisheries for our tribe. So I know it's important probably to have this background information, and so I don't know. It's academia coming up against the real world. Sorry.
No, I
Yeah,
don't,
and the way I see it, these questions can provide a way to, sorry if I'm not coming through, um, to see how those policies are impacting people who are fishing currently, as well as how it has in the past. Particularly, I think that's where I'm hoping to ask those questions, related to Third Bridge and things like that. Those are, as the report says, like non-Indian things that are shaping fisheries. That's a perfect segue into talking about, well, what policies and other things are shaping your capacity to engage in this today or right now,
Yeah.
versus sometimes asking the question straight as, people can't respond unless they're really ready to go. It depends on the flow of the conversation and
Yeah,
how
Penobscot's been ready to go since Ed brought this to the commission. And I've just had one meeting with Judd when we sat outside on a bench in Orono and had a great discussion. So I've been kind of waiting for the follow-up. Has anybody contacted my fisheries people?
yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I had
Good.
another discussion. We've had a number of discussions, and John, the specifics in sort of the more scientific side of the realm are not hard to come by, although there's a tremendous amount of material out there. But the difficult piece to come to grips with is the way Wabanaki people would see sustenance, how it's happened in the past, what's happening now, and what could be in the future. And
Yeah,
the way we've chosen to try to come to grips with that part of the study.
yeah. So Sandra's been trying to jump in here. So Sandy, the floor is yours.
Oh my goodness, after I just spent all that time typing it. I'm glad you guys are here this afternoon. In listening to what you're saying, and I apologize, I'll admit I didn't read my homework. But it sounds like you're using a mixed methodology for this report, and then it sounds like that it's a series of key informant interviews. I would suggest that if you're going to use key informants, that those help to guide the focus group, um, because within each community we all have those people who have that knowledge and have those skills. And so rather than doing a focus group and then trying to find key informants, I would suggest the reverse, because you can get that historical and present context that would help guide those conversations within the focus groups. And then finally, I have a suggestion from Ziwayig, and that would be Frederick J. Moore III. Frederick J. Moore III is an nth generation fisherman from Passamaquoddy Bay who was taught by his great grandfather and his grandfather and his father, and has taught his sons how to fish, why we fish, what we fish. And he also has experience in the Maine legislature. And at least in Augusta, not at home, but he still has a decent reputation. So I would highly suggest him for a key informant to have a conversation with Ziwayig, and I can help to facilitate that conversation if you or Judd do not know Moose. There, I'm done.
absolutely, that'd be helpful. And like to your earlier question too, um, I think like these aren't, and Judd was saying, like the only source of of information. It's really, Judd's done a number of key informant interviews as well. Um, we're trying to triangulate all the different data that we're having to make it a very robust source of information for you all. So the stuff that we're historical analysis that we're doing in our report is also things that we're hearing from people, and that sort of consistency makes what we're saying.
Hello? Yes.
We
Oh,
just
sorry. Am I back?
You're back, Tony.
You probably just missed it all. But
No.
yeah, it's just, yeah, they're going to be there's air of support to what we're trying to say, and we're certainly open to different ways of doing that as well. Yeah, I would imagine that there's going to be several layers and opportunities for key informants to comment directly on the report, instead of maybe not using them in a focus group per se. I want to provide as many levels of people to make comments on what we're talking about as possible, because again, it's just going to make it more robust, and that's the goal. Because I think this conversation needs to be had, and it has to be done properly.
Bob, you had your hand up a while back.
Thank you. I think I've been muted. I was just going to, Tony, if you're just looking for a list of people who might be invited for interviews for one reason or another, first of all, any of the tribal reps on the commission, especially Sam St. John, who has now established himself as an expert in ice fishing, but also Ed Bassett and Fred Moore from the Passamaquoddy tribe. They are a wealth of information.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Bert?
Yeah, listening to the discussion, it brought a question to mind. As I know, we're talking sustenance. Now, the discussion that I've heard thus far basically is regarding fishing. Sustenance covers a lot more than that. The hunting, the gathering, and such. Is that also included, or is it specifically geared toward the fishing?
the commission, Bert, wanted us to focus on fishing. We're quite aware that sustenance, first of all, in terms of hunting, gathering, etc., is much broader than fishing. Fishing is just one part of sustenance. Also, that sustenance doesn't just mean eating. Sustenance means sharing. Sustenance means the culture. So there are a number of dimensions here, but we are focused on fishing by the commission's order on doing the study.
All right, thank you.
I would love to do a follow-up with doing more with this, but yeah, the focus is fisheries.
Yeah, we've talked with Ed Bassett already. Actually, Fred Moore is on my list, but it's also important for us to know as much as we can before we interview people with a lot of knowledge. So it's a process that goes back and forth.
Well, the only comment that I'd like to make is that while we're, shaping up this study and what it's going to look like, there are things happening on a daily basis now, that impacts tribal sustenance fishing. We have hydro project licensing going on right now on some of the hydro projects on the Penobscot River that's impacting our tribal members' ability to exercise their sustenance fishing rights. And so, is there a time frame to wrap this up, Judd? Or
Well,
it just seems like it's been going on now for 3 or 4 years, and
well, I got hired a little over a year ago, so I know it was on the commission's plate before that, and of course the pandemic, various other things have delayed this as well as everything else. But our time frame is to try to wrap it up this year.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Matt?
I just wanted to offer help here at Indian Township. Certainly can help coordinate with some people that I feel would be beneficial to this, and from commercial to harvesting.
That would be great, Matt. And
Thank you.
actually, I intended to talk to you at some point as well. When
I know nothing about fishing.
we'll find out.
All righty, anybody else on this subject of the sustenance fishing reports? Looks like we have one more minute before 12:45. Paul?
Yeah, on that point, Paul Downing sent me a message that he is not able to join the meeting at all because he went straight into a meeting with the chief when he got to Sabayak. The executive session issue, which I had discussed with Paul, it's a personnel issue, and I'm the only employee of the Tribal State Commission. So without Paul, unless somebody already knows what was going on with that issue, I'm not sure how you proceed.
I think given the circumstances that Paul won't be able to join us, that we'll have to table that and cancel the executive session. So we have 15 more minutes.
Okay. Then I would, if I could follow up on the conversation about sustenance, I guess I just wanted to reiterate, maybe in case maybe it doesn't need to be, but I think Judd and Tony and Lexi are all really interested in getting input from all of you, not only on the draft documents that were sent out regarding the focus groups, but also, some of you have offered already to suggest people who could be participants. And I think they're really asking strongly for everyone to submit any names, any suggestions, people that could lead them to other people. That's, I hope you will all, try to help with that.
So I guess one question I have, again, going back to the foundation for this study, which Ed brought to the commission, what do you envision the final product to look like? You would have to, at some point, I would suspect, do somewhat of a review of the various state fishing regulations and policies that come up against or are problematic from a tribal sustenance fishing standpoint. Have you done that analysis?
Yeah, I mean, we've done quite a bit of research on that. The policies are not that hard to find, and we may want to talk to people about those. I've talked to Sean, I can't remember his name now. He's the head of the Sea Run Fisheries part of the
Sean Ledwin?
Sean Lenwood, yeah. I talked to him at some length, and we'll talk to others. But yes, that's proceeding, and that's part of the study. What we want it to look like in the end, I mean, obviously until it's done, we don't know for sure, but it's going to be a review, sort of a brief historical review, and then a review of what the policies are now and how they've impacted sustenance fishing. It's a very broad topic, as you know, and there's a number of ways, policies on dams, on relicensing, policies on introduction of other species. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on. Policies on that have limited native access to the traditional fishing places. So we hope it will be an informational document, and one that will have some issues that practical recommendations that can be brought to the legislature wherever they might be brought. So yeah, I'm sorry to be a little vague on that. It's just
No, that's very helpful, Judd. Thank you.
And I think at some point we've sent out an outline of where we're going with this study. I can send you one again.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Go
Okay.
ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I was gonna specifically mention the outline that had been sent out, and I can send that out again. And I want, this prompts me to wonder, there was an active committee that was working on this study. I mean, that's kind of fallen by the wayside since COVID, I guess, really. But I would wonder if it might make sense to just kind of agree that we should try to reactivate that committee. The members of the committee, as I recall, were Matt and John and Sam and James Cody and John Cashwell. That committee hasn't met for a while, but that was initially the committee that was, interacting with respect to this study. And I guess I'd put it to Judd and Tony also, if would it be helpful to you to have that committee get reactivated?
That would be helpful.
Absolutely. I think, as we come up with drafts of the report, having, feedback at those stages, I think would be really helpful in getting that final product done.
So I think we have all the members of that committee except Sam on here. Is there a sense of, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine with me. I would invite Ed too as a ex officio, or, he's not on the commission anymore, but.
And he has actually participated in some of the committee meetings that were held previously. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right, then I will send out, in conjunction with Judd and Tony and Lexi, I'll send out something to the committee members to try to, gear that back up.
All righty. Any other discussion or questions about the project while we have all three researchers here?
I'll just give a quick, interesting thought I had. And as I was tending my Elvernet yesterday, I was on the bank of the St. Croix. And as I looked down, I found a bunch of, I don't know the technical term, but a bunch of flakes from the archaeological artifacts from making tools right on the surface. So I thought that was pretty cool that, I'm fishing in a spot where my ancestors have been for thousands of years.
Great. That's great, Matt. Thanks for sharing that.
So,
All righty, Paul. Do we have anything else here? We have a few minutes left.
well, I think that given the time frame, we probably need to defer the discussion of those possible present item 7B on the agenda. I think we can defer that. I guess we can defer the discussion of meeting schedule, and I can just try to send something around on that. There was the addition to the agenda regarding that request that came in from the Intertribal Repatriation Committee seeking support from MITSC on their effort to secure repatriation of remains and artifacts from the Harvard Peabody Museum. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that draft letter that I sent around, but they are seeking support from MITSC in their efforts to secure the repatriation from Harvard Peabody Museum. And MITSC has had some, I know MITSC has had some involvement with repatriation issues. Bonnie Newsom, of course, was a MITSC member and has been extremely involved with all of that for many years. And I know that in 2013, it was an agenda item that was discussed with Governor LePage because there were regarding the State Museum, repatriation from the State Museum. I don't know how that turned out, but there is some precedent for MITSC, being involved with repatriation efforts. And so the request is there, and I guess I'm looking for, guidance from the commission.
Bert?
I think that we should go ahead and send, you know, that letter of support, you know, for that repatriation. Though it might not seem that it would be within our job because, you know, it doesn't deal with the state of Maine. I think it would be good. It wouldn't hurt. You know, the fact that we are a intergovernmental entity, you know, which involves the state of Maine as well as the tribes. I don't see how it can hurt, or I don't see how it would go against, you know, what our job is. So I would be all for it.
Is that a motion, Bert, to support the repatriation committee?
Sure, I make that motion wholeheartedly.
I would second that motion. Has motion been made and seconded? Any discussion? Sarah?
Yeah, I have some questions about that. I wondered whether there might be some other way to work with the Harvard Peabody Museum. We talk about the need for people to understand and know Native history and culture, and museums are places that educate the public. And I was wondering if there might be some room for compromise so that the museum could keep some items, not necessarily you know, bones or body parts or whatever, but some of the other funereal items, and work with the tribes to create a display that would educate the public. And I'm thinking about, for example, I visited the King Tutankhamun exhibit at a museum, and I learned a lot about Egyptian history and the pharaohs and all that kind of stuff. And museums have items from all over the world, all kinds of cultural items. And I think about the bigger picture, whether museums should try to, you know, send a lot of those items back to their countries and peoples of origin. So I'm wondering whether we could have an agreement with the museum that would help advance the understanding of Native history and culture in a respectful way.
Yeah,
Again,
to an extent, this is governed by federal law to an extent. There is a federal NAGPRA, the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, which requires funerary objects to be returned to the indigenous tribes for a proper ceremonial internment of their ancestors. Sandra, you were jumping to get in here on this discussion, so go ahead.
Jumping. Oh my God, that's the most exercise I've had in a year. I understand and I totally respect your opinion, Sarah, and we will agree to disagree on this. But think about it in terms of you are the last person to know your family's history. They found a bunch of funerary and non-funerary objects that belong to your ancestors, and they want to put them on display so that they can determine what narrative is given around the education of the significance of those items. How would you feel to know that you cannot, that what belongs to you from generations is still being held hostage by museum people who haven't necessarily consulted with you to determine what the actual education around the history of those items
that's the
should be?
whole point. I would not agree to them keeping the items unless they consulted with natives and could do it in an educational, respectful way. And if there's no way to do that, then then I agree. I just think that any opportunity that we have to educate the general public with Native direction and involvement, we should think about.
Yeah, the
And
native
that,
and
and that's
direction
what
and
we'll do when they
involvement.
get returned to us into our own communities, where we can determine how people see them and learn about them, but also that we can welcome back our ancestors to where not just but the items of our community, our collective history belong. So it's basically it's Indian self-determination in terms of history and education. Okay, I gotta shut
Yeah,
up.
there's no one better than to tell our history than the tribes itself, ourselves. There's a saying going around now that says, "Don't talk about us without us." So Bert, go ahead.
So there is no compromise when it comes to repatriating the remains of our people. And I understand that you mentioned the bones and stuff like that. But even our funerary items, they were placed there for a reason. Those funerary items are very ceremonial. And being someone who is responsible for some of our ceremonies, there is no respectful compromise whatsoever. So, I've been aware of all these things. My Uncle Irvin, the elders that I worked with, in the past, who have involved themselves, and I was a small part of some of the repatriation way back, and the problems that had to that we had the hurdles that were we had to jump, and yet we still have some of these museums who have refused in the past to give them up, or they find ways to hold on to them as long as they possibly can until it comes down to the point where they can no longer do so. Well, that in itself is disrespectful. First of all, the fact that they were taken, the fact that they were put in those boxes in those rooms, we feel it. When we go into those museums, we feel it. Why do we feel it? Because those are our ancestors. Maybe you might not be able to understand that. And maybe there's a lot of people here that might not understand it, but I will tell you, I know that feeling. I know standing in one of those museums and you hear them cry, you feel them. They need to come home. Those objects need to come home because they were placed with our relatives, our ancestors at their place. So I'm sorry, I cannot see any justification to refer to anything as a respectful compromise. Thank you.
I don't mean to be disrespectful at all, and I will not argue against returning items. I would suggest, however, that as you press this with the museum, you ask for an opportunity to work with them to create an exhibit that will explain or help non-natives understand your culture and history. I think that you are the best people to tell about that culture and history, no doubt. But I think that there's a lot more non-natives that go through that Harvard Peabody Museum that could benefit from that education, so that maybe as a sort of a, I don't know what they call it, a bargaining chip or a peace making thing or whatever, when you talk with the museum, maybe you could talk about doing something jointly that's native conceived, but would educate the non-native public and let people understand why it's so important that these items be repatriated and why it's so important that native culture be understood. I think that's one of the big problems that we say we're facing, is that the non-natives, myself included, don't have a good understanding or feeling for Native history and culture. And I believe that you need to do, we all need to do, we talk about education. We need to do some education.
And
I
I would
think,
propose that when
Matt-
we talk with Harvard, that we replace whatever is there and we take a space and there is something written about why these items are no longer here. And then we can post a map of the state of Maine with directions to our tribal communities, where within we have our own museums and the capacity to already to accept our ancestors home, to welcome them home, to give them their proper burial, but also to educate people and have you come to us to get the
That'd be
information.
fine. That'd be
Go
fine.
ahead, Matt, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to say that, Sarah, those conversations have been had.
Okay.
That's not a new idea. So this
Okay.
discussion with Harvard Peabody Museum has been going on for years. They've had our ancestors in the funeral objects for a long time, hundreds of years. So the conversation has been had.
Bert,
The thing is, we are here. We have our history. They want to know the history. They don't need the remains of our ancestors there. They don't need those funerary items, those things that are held sacred to us. We are here. If they want to learn our history, come to us. We have a lot of historians who have, and we have a lot of people who have put that information out. But we're alive. It's not like we're gone. So there's no reason for them to hold them whatsoever. There's no reason that they have them in the first place. So that's all.
all righty. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to this conversation before we vote on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to support the repatriation committee with their request to the Peabody, say aye.
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 Are there any abstentions? Is anybody opposed? Thank you. I have to run. I'm 6 minutes late for my next Zoom meeting.
We need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you very much for this meeting.
Only one.
Everyone, stay safe.